Tom Lawson had always prided himself on the life he had built. At 35, he was a successful architect with a thriving firm in the heart of Chicago. He was known for his meticulous nature, both in his professional and personal life. His designs were admired for their precision, much like the way he managed his relationships. He had grown up in a small town in Illinois, the son of a high school teacher and a nurse. His upbringing was modest but full of love, and it instilled in him values of honesty, loyalty, and hard work. Emily Lawson, née Parker, was Tom's high school sweetheart. At 33, she was the epitome of grace and charm, with a magnetic personality that drew people to her effortlessly. She had always been the more outgoing of the two, the natural flair for socializing. Growing up in a wealthy family in Chicago, Emily had been accustomed to a life of privilege. She had studied art history at Northwestern University, but had never pursued a career, instead dedicating herself to various charitable causes and their home life. Emily and Tom seemed to be the perfect couple, balancing each other out in every way. Where Tom was methodical, Emily was spontaneous. Where Tom was reserved, Emily was vivacious. They had 2 children together, Sophie, a bright and curious 7-year-old, and Ethan, a 4-year-old ball of energy who idolized his father. Their life together was the picture of suburban bliss, living in a beautiful home in the quiet, upscale neighborhood of Lincoln Park. From the outside, everything seemed perfect, but as Tom was about to discover, the life he thought was so secure was built on a foundation of lies. It was a crisp autumn evening in late October, the kind of night where the air was filled with the scent of fallen leaves and a hint of wood smoke from the fireplaces of nearby homes. Tom had just returned from a long day at work, tired but content. He loved the creative challenges his job presented, and today had been particularly rewarding. He had just finalized a design for a new eco-friendly office building, a project he had been working on for months. The sense of accomplishment he felt as he walked through the front door of his home was palpable. Inside, the house was warm and inviting, with soft lighting illuminating the modern, yet cozy, decor that Emily had so carefully curated. Sophie and Ethan were playing a game in the living room, their laughter echoing through the house. Tom smiled as he watched them for a moment, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the life he had. Emily was upstairs in their bedroom, getting ready for what Tom assumed was one of her regular girls' nights out. She had mentioned it, passing a few days ago, and Tom hadn't thought much of it. Emily's social calendar was always full, a stark contrast to Tom's preference for quiet evenings at home. He admired her ability to juggle so many social commitments with ease, something he had never been able to do. As Tom made his way upstairs to say goodbye before Emily left, he could hear the faint sound of music coming from their bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, he caught a glimpse of Emily standing in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the straps of a sleek black dress. It was a dress he had never seen before, elegant, form-fitting, and undeniably seductive. For a moment, Tom felt a surge of desire. Even after all these years, Emily could still take his breath away. He knocked lightly on the door and pushed it open, stepping into the room. "Wow," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "You look stunning," and Emily turned to face him, her expression unreadable. There was a moment of silence between them, an odd tension that Tom couldn't quite place. Then she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, Tom," she said, her voice cool and distant. Tom's brow furrowed slightly. Something about her tone was off, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He chalked it up to the stress of getting ready and walked over to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Big night planned?" he asked lightly, trying to dispel the strange atmosphere. Emily hesitated for a moment before answering, and when she did, her words sent a chill down Tom's spine. "My lover's picking me up tonight," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I'll make love to him, then come back and make love to you." Tom froze, his arms still around her, his mind struggling to comprehend what she had just said. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath him, leaving him unsteady and disoriented. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily stepped out of his embrace and turned back to the mirror, smoothing her dress as if nothing had happened. Her expression was eerily calm, almost indifferent. "You heard me, Tom," she said, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "I'm going out with my lover tonight." Tom felt as though he had been punched in the gut. The room seemed to spin around him, and he had to grab the edge of the dresser to steady himself. "Is this some kind of joke, Emily?" he asked, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Because if it is, it's not funny." Emily finally turned to face him fully, her expression hardening. "No, Tom, it's not a joke," she said flatly. "I've been seeing someone else for a while now. I didn't want to hide it anymore." The words hit Tom like a sledgehammer. He staggered back, unable to process the betrayal. His mind raced, trying to piece together the clues he had missed, the signs that something was wrong. But there had been none, or at least none that he had noticed. Emily had always been affectionate, always attentive. How had he been so blind? Why? He finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse with emotion. Why would you do this to us? To our family? Emily sighed and looked away, her gaze distant. I don't know, Tom, she said quietly. Maybe I got bored. Maybe I wanted something different, something more exciting. Tom couldn't believe what he was hearing. The woman he had loved, the mother of his children, was standing in front of him, admitting to a betrayal so deep that it shattered everything he had believed in. And you just decided to tell me like this? He asked, his voice rising with anger. Like it's no big deal. Emily shrugged, her indifference infuriating him even more. I thought you deserved to know the truth, she said simply. Tom stared at her, feeling a rage build inside him that he had never felt before. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shake her until she understood the devastation she was causing. But all he could do was stand there, paralyzed by the enormity of what was happening. I can't believe this, he said, more to himself than to her. I can't believe you would do this to us. Emily said nothing, her expression unreadable. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them both. Finally, Emily broke the silence. I should go, she said, glancing at the clock on the wall. He'll be here soon. Tom's heart twisted at her words. She was really going to leave him, to go to another man, and then come back as if nothing had happened. It was unthinkable. But before he could say anything, Emily turned and walked out of the room, leaving Tom standing there, stunned and broken. Tom stood in their bedroom for what felt like an eternity, his mind reeling. The sounds of his children playing downstairs drifted up to him, a cruel reminder of the life that was slipping through his fingers. How could Emily do this to them? To him? To their family? He felt as if he were trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up. He'd replayed their conversation over and over in his mind, trying to find some explanation, some reason that made sense. But there was none. Emily's betrayal was as senseless as it was devastating. Finally, he forced himself to move to leave the room that now felt like a tomb. He walked down the stairs in a daze, not even sure where he was going. When he reached the living room, Sophie looked up at him with a smile. Daddy, are you okay? She'd asked, her innocent eyes filled with concern. Tom tried to smile, but it felt hollow. I'm fine, sweetheart, he lied. Daddy's just a little tired. Sophie accepted his answer without question, returning to her game. Tom watched her for a moment, his heart itching. How could he protect her from the pain that was coming? How could he shield her and Ethan from the fallout of Emily's betrayal? He walked into the kitchen, needing something to do, some way to distract himself from the thoughts swirling in his head. He poured himself a glass of water, but it did little to quench the burning anger and hurt inside him. Just as he was about to head back to the living room, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw that it was a call from Mark, his best friend since college. Mark was someone Tom had always trusted, someone who had been there for him through thick and thin. If there was anyone he could talk to right now, it was Mark. Tom answered the call, trying to keep his voice steady. Hey, Mark. Tom, you need to come over. Mark's voice was urgent, panicked even. I can't explain. Just get here. Now. Tom's heart skipped a beat. Mark never sounded like this, never panicked. Something was very wrong. What's going on? Tom asked, his mind racing. Just come, Mark insisted. Please, Tom. You need to see this. Tom didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his keys and told Sophie and Ethan that he had to step out for a bit. He didn't give them any details, just a quick promise that he'd be back soon. Then he was out the door, his mind spinning with possibilities. What could have Mark so shaken? The drive to Mark's apartment was a blur. Tom barely registered the world around him, his thoughts consumed by a mix of fear and anger. When he finally arrived, he parked haphazardly and rushed to Mark's door. He knocked loudly, and within seconds, the door flew open. Mark stood there, his face pale, his eyes wide with something close to fear. Without a word, he motioned for Tom to follow him inside. The apartment was dark, the only light coming from a living room at the end of the hall. Tom followed Mark, his heart pounding in his chest. When they reached the living room, Tom's world came crashing down around him. The scene that greeted Tom was like something out of a nightmare. Emily was there, sprawled on the couch, her dress disheveled, her hair a mess. Her eyes were closed, and for a moment, Tom feared the worst. But then he saw her chest rise and fall slowly, the shallow breaths of someone deeply unconscious. Beside her, slumped on the floor, was Jake, Mark's younger brother. Jake was in his late 20s, a troubled soul who had never quite found his way in life. He had struggled with addiction for years, bouncing in and out of rehab, never able to hold down a job or a steady relationship. He was the black sheep of his family, and Mark had always tried to help him, but it was clear that Jake was a lost cause. Now, seeing him here, next to his unconscious wife, Tom felt a rage unlike anything he had ever known. He didn't need to ask what had happened. It was written all over the scene in front of him. What the hell happened, Mark? Tom's voice was low, dangerous. Mark looked at Tom, his expression a mix of guilt and desperation. I didn't know, Tom, he said, his voice trembling. I swear to God, I didn't know. I came home and found them like this. Tom clenched his fists, trying to control the fury that was threatening to consume him. And you didn't think to call the police? He demanded. Mark shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. I didn't know what to do, he admitted. I didn't want to make things worse. Tom stared at his friend, disbelief warring with the anger inside him. Mark had always been the rational one, the one who kept his head in a crisis. But now, seeing his brother and Emily like this, he had fallen apart. Tom walked over to Emily, kneeling beside her. He gently shook her shoulder, trying to rouse her. But she didn't stir, her breathing remaining shallow and even. She's out cold, Tom muttered, his voice tight with emotion. What the hell did they do? Mark swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. There were empty bottles in the kitchen, he said. I think they were drinking, and maybe more. Tom closed his eyes, trying to block out the images flashing through his mind. His wife, the woman he had loved and trusted, lying here in a drunken stupor next to another man. It was too much to bear. But then a new thought pierced through the haze of anger and despair. Sophie and Ethan. How could he explain this to them? How could he ever make them understand what their mother had done? Tom stood up, his mind made up. He couldn't stay here, couldn't bear to look at Emily and Jake any longer. He needed to get out, to clear his head, figure out what the hell he was going to do next. I'm taking the kids, Tom said, his voice cold and final. And I'm filing for divorce first thing tomorrow. Mark nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry, Tom, he whispered. Tom drove back home with his thoughts in chaos, the gravity of the situation pressing down on him like a weight he couldn't lift. Emily's betrayal had been shocking enough, but to find her in such a compromising position with Jake had pushed Tom beyond the limits of what he could endure. His mind buzzed with questions and the burning need for answers, but more than anything, he felt an overwhelming sense of determination. He had to protect his children, and he had to reclaim control of his life from the wreckage Emily had created. When Tom arrived home, the house was quiet. The kids had fallen asleep on the couch, their small bodies nestled against each other, innocent and unaware of the storm brewing around them. Tom stood at the doorway, watching them for a moment, his heart itching. He couldn't allow this scandal to destroy their lives. They deserved better, and he would make sure they got it. He carefully picked up Sophie first, carrying her to her bed, then returned for Ethan. As he tucked them in, he resolved that from this moment forward, everything he did would be for them. He wouldn't let Emily's reckless behavior bring chaos into their world. Back in his bedroom, Tom sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the space where Emily had been just hours before. The room felt cold and unfamiliar, like a place where he no longer belonged. He had loved her, trusted her, built a life with her, and now all of it had been reduced to ashes. As he sat there, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Mark. I'm sorry, Tom. I don't know how this happened. Please, let me know what I can do to help. Tom stared at the message, feeling a surge of bitterness. Mark had always been his best friend, but now their relationship was tainted by what had happened. The betrayal wasn't just Emily's, it was Jake's, and by extension, Mark's family. How could he ever look at Mark the same way again? Tom didn't respond to the text. Instead, he opened his laptop and began gathering the documents he would need for the divorce. He compiled financial records, bank statements, and anything that could help him secure full custody of the children. The more he delved into the paperwork, the more focused he became, his anger transforming into a cold, methodical drive. As dawn approached, Tom's preparations were complete. He had contacted a divorce lawyer, scheduled an appointment for later that day, and drafted a letter to Emily explaining that he was filing for divorce and taking the kids. It was a blunt, emotionless letter. Tom couldn't afford to be sentimental. Emily had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. Tom arrived at the law office later that morning, feeling like a different man than the one who had discovered his wife's betrayal the night before. His lawyer, Rachel Collins, was a sharp, no-nonsense attorney known for her fierce representation in family court. She had been recommended by a colleague, and after their initial consultation, Tom knew she was the right person to help him navigate the legal battle ahead. Rachel listened intently as Tom explained the situation, her expression professional but sympathetic. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her notepad. This is a clear case of infidelity, Rachel said. Combined with the incident involving Jake, we have a strong argument for full custody. The courts don't look kindly on parents who engage in reckless behavior, especially when it endangers the well-being of their children. Tom nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. What about the house? I want to keep it for the kids. We'll push for that too, Rachel assured him. Given Emily's actions, we can argue that you're the more stable parent, which will work in our favor. "Do you have any evidence of her affair?" Tom hesitated, then pulled out his phone. He showed Rachel the messages he had found on Emily's phone after she left that night. Texts between her and the man she had been seeing, filled with incriminating details. Rachel's eyes narrowed as she scrolled through the messages. "This will help. We'll use these to demonstrate her lack of commitment to the marriage and her disregard for the impact of her actions on the children." Tom felt a surge of vindication as he watched Rachel take notes. He had always been a man who believed in justice, and now justice was within his reach. Emily had destroyed their family, but he would ensure that she didn't get away with it unscathed. As the divorce proceedings moved forward, Tom's resolve only hardened. He refused to engage in any direct communication with Emily, relying instead on his lawyer to handle all interactions. Emily's initial shock at Tom's swift actions turned into anger, but she quickly realized that she was in a losing position. The evidence of her affair, combined with her irresponsible behavior, left her with little leverage in the divorce. During the court hearings, Emily's facade began to crumble. She had always been the charming, composed one, but now she was visibly shaken, struggling to maintain her composure as Tom's lawyer presented the evidence against her. The judge's stern expression as he reviewed the case told Tom everything he needed to know. Emily's actions were indefensible, and the court would not be lenient. The final ruling came down hard on Emily. Tom was awarded full custody of Sophie and Ethan, with Emily granted limited visitation rights under strict supervision. The judge also ruled that Tom would retain ownership of the family home, citing the need for stability for the children. Emily was ordered to pay child support, though the amount was reduced given her lack of stable income. As the gavel fell, marking the end of the proceedings, Tom felt a mix of relief and sorrow. He had won, but the victory was bittersweet. The woman he had loved, the life they had shared, it was all gone, reduced to legal documents and courtroom decisions. After the court hearing, Tom took the children to a park near their home. He watched as they played, their laughter filling the air, and for the first time in weeks he felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed, and while the damage was extensive, there was still a future to build. Emily, on the other hand, was left to face the consequences of her actions. With her reputation in tatters and her social circle shrinking, she found herself isolated and alone. Her lover had distanced himself from her after the scandal, unwilling to be associated with the fallout. The life she had known, the comfort, the security, the love, had been stripped away, leaving her to pick up the pieces of her shattered existence. Tom never looked back. He focused on rebuilding his life and providing the best possible future for Sophie and Ethan. The betrayal had been a harsh lesson, but it had also made him stronger, more determined to protect what truly mattered. He had lost a wife, but he had gained a new sense of purpose. Years later, as Tom watched his children grow, he found solace in the knowledge that he had done everything he could to shield them from the darkness that had briefly invaded their lives. They were happy, thriving, and surrounded by love, everything he had fought so hard to give them. And as for Emily, Tom heard rumors from time to time about her struggles to rebuild her life, but he never sought out details. She was a part of his past, a chapter that had closed. His focus was on the present, on the life he had created for his children and himself, a life free from the lies and betrayal that had once threatened to destroy him.